And welcome everybody to this session of the Compassionate Action Conference. This is actually the EdNet forum for us. It's called the Education Network Forum. And it's the Charter's way, the Charter for Compassion's way to experience new philosophies, pedagogies, and methodologies of education as they are in practice today. So this forum has been happening for the last 3 years at the Charter for Compassion. It's what we've done is we've gone around the globe trying to find different programs that make an impact in education, and we cover relevant topics from conception of a child to parenting, and even exploring the continual timeline of learning to the end of life. These sessions usually take place on the third Thursday of the month, and on this occasion, we're part of the Compassionate Action Conference, which is quite an honor. It does make our session a little bit briefer than it usually is, but I'm sure that we'll be able to get to know this amazing program that we found that was created by Natalie Updike from Shorecrest Preparatory School and her program, Prison Narratives. Her bio says she loves to celebrate empathy, diverse voices, and autonomy. Hailing originally from Indiana, she's now currently based in St. Petersburg. Natalie earned an MFA in creative writing from West Virginia University, an MA in literature from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and she has many more titles and experience that I would rather she shares with you. And so, without much more to say, but a big thank you for you to be here, Natalie, first, and anybody who's watching this. Natalie, the stage is yours.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. I hope that everything is tech issues wise we figured out. But as Merida mentioned, my name is Natalie Updike. I am from Shorecrest Preparatory School in St. Petersburg, Florida. It's the Tampa Bay area. And today I want to talk to you and share out some information about a course that I teach at Shorecrest, and it's called Prison Narratives. It's part of an English 12 honors elective. It's been running for about 3 years now, and some of the main kind of questions I've had digging into like my soul through the course is about how do we teach empathy and how do we garner this respect for human dignity. Those are, we can teach content, teach writing, but how do we teach these big picture concepts? So today I'm going to try to share some things that have worked and have not worked for me, and I would love to hear some feedback from you all as well. So first, I want to give a couple shout outs. Of course, Merida, Lucy, for connecting me with Charter for Compassion and the Compassionate Action Conference. I will be talking a little bit about the Appalachian Prison Book Project a little bit later, but a huge thanks to Dr. Katie Ryan, as well as Lydia Welker, who is joining us today, for all of their knowledge and inspiration and just like pep talks, especially from Lydia. And then last but not least, a shout out to my school and faculty who have linked me with Lucy to make this possible. So thank you all very much. So first things first, I do have a couple of sets of questions. This session is broken up by 3 sets of questions to try to provide us with some common language, but also some grounding in our conversation. So I think Merida is putting in the chat the link to the Google Doc. If you could hop into the Google Doc, I'm asking 4 main questions to start us off. You can choose to respond to however many or how few as you would like. But what brought you here today? What are you hoping to learn or contribute within this session? And what does empathy mean to you? What does dignity mean to you? And if you want to also communicate within each other, I've posted instructions for how to make a comment on Google Doc in case you're unfamiliar. But if we could make sure that chat link is shared. And then I will give you about 2 minutes to respond, and then we might share out after that. So take about 2 minutes. If there are any issues, please do interrupt me, let me know. All right, we'll take about 30-ish more seconds with the questions. Thank you for participating. Mm, mhm. Okay. So again, you can keep working on finishing up the questions, but I'm seeing a lot of good information and some really good questions about specifically curious about the types of questions students ask about the prison industrial complex and how I respond to the really difficult ones. I have a few later in this presentation, some statements more so than questions, and then, yeah, treating and being treated with kindness and respect. I think that that is at the very heart of this entire conversation. So thank you for bringing that up as well. Um, so empathy and dignity, hold on to those responses as well, and try to, even if you didn't have a chance to respond, try to think about what those big picture concepts mean, because having some shared language and a shared definition is part of the process to teaching these concepts with teenagers especially. um, with the conversation we're having today, as well as in the classroom, my classroom itself, I use person first language. So I wanted to clarify just some terms that I'll be using. Um, the person first language essentially talks about the dignity that is restored to the person that we are referencing. So instead of using terms like inmate or prisoner or convict, felon, etc., I'll be using terms like incarcerated person or person who is incarcerated in order to try to restore back that piece of dignity to the person and not have a very shaved down limited view of their humanity, as a label like inmate, prisoner, convict often tends to lean itself toward. Um, all right, I wanted to share with you, a couple of you already know this, but many of you do not, my essential road to teaching prison narratives, because it's not something that is a typical English class or literature class, I will say. So at West Virginia University, when I was working on my Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, I had the opportunity in my graduate research to take a course with Dr. Katie Ryan, and that was about 2015 to 2018-ish. And Dr. Katie Ryan is not only my teacher goals of sorts, but she does such phenomenal work with Appalachian Prison Book Project, Inside Out courses, in her role as well as a teacher emeritus. So within that course, I was able to look at solitary confinement and depictions from TV and media. That was my main focus of study, because solitary confinement terrifies me as one of the main components of the prison system in the US, as well as supermaxes. I would say those are kind of the two biggest things that are the most terrifying and the most they rob the most amount of dignity, I guess you could say, from people who are incarcerated. Within after the course that I took, I interned at Appalachian Prison Book Project, which APBP is a nonprofit based out of West Virginia. It serves a 6-state region, and teeny tiny print here, I should have made it bigger, are the 6 states. They also do book clubs and writers' workshops, just a ton of incredible things that pour out of APBP. And I know Lydia is a volunteer for them as well. So, fast forward after these experiences, I landed in Florida, hopped around a little bit, ended up at Shorecrest, and the prison narratives course was born out of a want to attempt to recreate the course that I took with Katie that was a paradigm shifting course. It changed my worldview, my perception of how to treat others with compassion and humanity and dignity, far more than what I had been conditioned to do from the media's perspective. So I wanted to pass that on in whatever way I could. And my school is amazing in the ability for me to create a course so challenging as prison narratives. And then that led to kind of this final placement where we're at today, is how to garner student empathy and a response toward human dignity without sensationalizing or exploiting the experiences of those incarcerated. I think a lot of people initially are attracted to these studies because it is a study in trauma, but it is also a study in hope. And I didn't want to have a sensationalized or exploitive lens. So those were really important in order to have this focus on empathy and dignity. Um, Question set number 2. You can tell I'm a teacher. I did want to, if you could go back into the Google Doc, I wanted to ask about some images or concepts that come to mind when you hear the word prison. So you can just, bullet point jot down a couple notes. What familiarity do you have with prison systems in general, and share to your comfort level? What knowledge do you have of the U.S. prison system specifically? So that's the majority of our conversation today, is about the U.S. prison system. Not only because it's the most pervasive, but also because I teach in the US. And where do you think most people acquire their knowledge or awareness of the US prison system? So if you could take 2 more minutes, and then I will, review some of the responses, shout them out, and we'll go from there. Mm-hmm. Take about 30-ish more seconds. I know it's not enough time. Mm. All right, as we're wrapping up, I'm just seeing a lot of excellent responses, and I'm learning a lot already as well. Um, Wanted to show you this graphic, and then looking at, I'm looking at Lydia's response. Paw Patrol. I didn't even think of that. We'll have to talk about that later. And yes, television, I think, is one of the main culprits, I guess. And I see that, yeah, Heather's commenting on news and TV series. I absolutely agree. And so I wanted to share this graphic out, as well as hear from, you all and your knowledge base, but to look at, it's from Prison Policy Initiative, and it's 2025 data, but look at what really is what really goes into the term incarcerated. And so we have prison versus jail. That's, for some people, is equivalent, but they're dramatically different. And then we have state and federal, and we have immigration detention. We have juvenile facilities. We have involuntary commitment in terms of behavioral health. So just starting a baseline of knowledge for students is just, what does the term incarcerated mean? And then the really striking part to me, other than just, the pervasiveness of it, as well as the many offshoots, is the not convicted is about 500,000. And so you have people sitting in jails that have not been convicted of a crime yet, or at all. So couple of things. This actually goes back to, I think, one of the comments from the initial question set. When I first started teaching this course, I ran into a student, I think it was about week 2, and we were talking about human dignity, and he said that criminals, quote unquote criminals, should be locked up and fed through a hole in a door forever. So I upon first teaching this course, my initial response would be frustration with, hearing something extreme and dehumanizing like this. However, instead of, coming at that student with any sort of frustration, I learned to ask a lot of questions and to use kind of my literary analysis lens to break down their own rhetoric. So thinking about the word criminals that he uses, and what goes into what constitutes criminality. That would be one, question that I would try to ask the student. And also being locked up and fed through a hole, and all of the dehumanized and impersonal effects of that. The control is completely one-sided. The power dynamic is completely one-sided. And then the door as this barrier, this impermeable barrier, and then the timestamp, the longevity of forever. So asking the student questions about, well, is this in every case? Does forever mean forever? In your estimation, the rest of their life? Can they parole? Like, what more nuance can we add to this conversation? That was one of the first things that I learned, was how to be less emotional with the process, even though it's a very emotional subject, and how to not come with a sense of defensiveness, but to really just be curious and inquisitive about their responses. Another student had said, prisoners get 3 meals a day and a roof over their head. What's the issue? And so very similar tactic of what goes into those meals. How frequent, what's the nutrient density? Do they account for allergies? Do they account for religious reasons? And then the entire rhetoric that I'm sure you all are familiar with, but the whole lock them up and throw away the key and don't do the crime if you can't do the time. So here were a lot of phrases that early on I was kind of combating and trying to figure out ways to take those phrases and not shut them down and not dismiss them, but to have, again, that curiosity and open up the door in the discussion. And what I think it comes down to, and I retyped these questions so many times last night trying to get the right language, but do all humans have an innate right to dignity? And then, what is our definition of dignity? Going back to that. If the answer is yes, does abiding by the law have a causal relationship with that innate dignity? So those would be the bigger picture questions of this discussion and what I try to have in class in terms of discussion. Very, very quickly, the US is, and I think some of you already spoke to this in your responses, but US is the country with the highest incarceration rate per our population and highest incarceration rate in the world and highest recidivism rate as well. The reincarceration rate is the recidivism rate. It also, and this is a asterisk thanks to Lydia, it overlaps with nearly every other societal system. Like she brought that to my attention a couple years ago, and I've been thinking about it ever since. But just education, economics, gender, healthcare, environment, politics, anything that kind of exists, the prison system is connected to it. So that left me questioning, okay, highest incarceration rate, highest recidivism rate, and most overlapping or interconnected system. Okay, so why is it invisible? It's hidden. And I think strategically, obviously, for security reasons, for a lot of times, I think I haven't driven by a prison recently, like maybe a jail, but not a prison environment. They are out of sight, out of mind. And I think that is also strategic psychologically, because then we are more dependent either to seek it out ourselves and have that awareness or to absorb and soak in the inaccurate media representations of those depictions, which are often dehumanizing. And so, students, I wanted to kind of push back on that initial assessment of, well, if we just take like Prison Break or Oz or any of the number of shows, are those accurate in any way? Can they be? How do you simulate experiences? Do they account for nuance? Spoiler alert, no. But then you have this malleability with especially 17, 18-year-olds who are still forming their opinions about the world and wanting them to think critically about kind of the connections that are happening here with a retention of dignity and empathy. So that was kind of my big picture goals for all of this. Two really important quotes just to give more voice to those in the course, as well as just to ground us a bit. But I teach A Question of Freedom by Dwayne Betts. He was incarcerated at 16 years old, tried as an adult, and he served 8.5 years of 9-year sentencing because of mandatory minimum sentencing laws, where they do 85% minimum. Now he is a poet, legal scholar, and prison reformer, and he likes to comment on how people's lives should not be defined by one moment. And his one moment was a 30-minute stretch of time. So I think that that's also important to consider when, I'm chatting with my kids is like, well, what's, a moment that we wish we could have redone, in other words. We all have them. We're all guilty of that in a sense. And then also Van Jones, who is an American lawyer, in the 13th documentary by Ava DuVernay, which I show in class with a lot of trigger warnings, sensitivity statements. But his quote is, the opposite of criminalization is humanization. And I think that is such a really good term or phrase to latch onto. So, two more parts. Number one, this is, I think, the main slide. I really sat down and I said, what do I do? With 3 years of this course, it's emotional every year for me to teach it. It's much harder emotionally to teach than my dystopian lit course, as well as the AP Lit courses that I teach. So why? What am I actually accomplishing in my course? So I sat down and this is what I could come up with. Number one, I asked that the students, we all practice the sense of gratitude. We, in my school, we're in a very privileged environment, and we need to acknowledge that and use it successfully. So we have this unique opportunity to enter the narratives in the stories. These books are not banned at my school. They are in many, many public schools, especially Florida public schools. And so once the students have a sense of that scope, then it is something that we are entering in as kind of a minority in these cases where we get to have these conversations, which is a special, incredible thing for us to hold on to. After we have that understanding of humility, then an acknowledgement of the problem. starts. We go all the way back to 13th Amendment and sometimes even before, where I think in the US we pride ourselves, we try to pride ourselves on, oh, slavery is illegal, and here's the legislation that shows that. But we inspect the language of the 13th Amendment and we realize, and the documentary 13th again helps us understand this, but the 13th Amendment, slavery is still legal in the US in the event of a crime. So then how do you expand your labor force? You have these Southern slaveholders. Now 13th Amendment is passed. How do you retain your labor force? By imprisoning Black bodies. And so we look at a lot of the bogus laws that emerged at that time that targeted certain populations in order to have a retention of certain labor force. And then we look at, of course, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. We don't read that entire text. It is a legalistic text rather than like a first person account, but phenomenal. But we look at what's the new wave of Black communities being targeted in power, in like imbalanced power dynamics, and the new Jim Crow would be the prison system, prison industrial complex. So, okay, we have that. We have our baseline. Number 3, I think, is the most controversial, but I really want students to have an awareness of kind of the shock value that's important for a lot of people to be rattled out of complacency. So, for example, when they're watching 13th actually makes an argument for shock value. And because it can be exploitive, that's why I feel like it's controversial. But in 13th, they're talking about Emmett Till's mother's decision to display his murdered, body at an open casket, and how that acted as a catalyst for a lot of the civil rights movement response. So 13th takes kind of that awareness, and then it elevates it. And again, it's done very strategically, lots of sensitivity statements, lots of trigger warnings. But having that shock, I think, rattles people enough to then say, this is worse than I thought, and to do something. So, and then 4 and 5 are kind of the heart of the course, 5 more so than 4, but they go hand in hand. So I wanted to imbue students with facts and statistics to the point where the problem was undeniable. And they could make their own assessments too. So it's not like forcing content at them, but get curious about something, inspect it. So a lot of really credible sites that they could look at. And then this transitions into, what is the main intention of incarceration in prison to begin with? And we talk about the 3 waves of punishment, which is another fact that they have to grapple with. So the first wave being, the very initial heart. Okay, you do something in a society, you need to be removed from society, to remove from your family. Your consequence, your penalty is the time that is being taken from you, as well as the connections to society. And the term penitentiary comes from penitent, to be penitent for actions, and then hopefully be rehabilitated and re-enter into society. That was the initial theoretical conception. We know that falls apart. So now, not only is that applied to people incarcerated in the US and many other places, but now there's kind of 2 other major waves of punishment. Number 2 would be the conditions themselves, which are threat of violence, sexual violence, not being able to eat nutritionally dense or food that is moldy, healthcare conditions. So there's this entire array of being in prison has these extreme negative punishments and consequences. And then the third and final tier, I don't know if it's the final actually, but the third tier is those collateral consequences. What happens after you are able to get out of prison? There's over 600 of them in terms of like voting rights and the ability to get a loan, the ability to get a job, be a homeowner, all of those. So they're punished kind of this third wave. So facts and statistics are great because, again, they create some sense of like undeniability. However, if you say to me like 2.3 million people are incarcerated, that's such a big number that a lot of people, students could just be like, yeah, that's bad. So number 5 is how we humanize those numbers, and that is the course text. So we really dig into the course text. I'll show you in just a second kind of the structure of the course, and we'll end with that. But how do we humanize? So we do a lot. The majority of the course is number 5. And then the last but not least is I want the students to end up with some accessibility to imagine a better worldview, like to take on a different approach. Do we uh, adopt some other country's model? We look at Norway's model. Do we talk about prison abolition in general? So, what possible view do they have of the world where they could view it not just as the current condition, the current state? So, with all that, the course structure here, and I'll go through very briefly these, but we read Leonard Peltier's My Life is My Sundance, Prison Writings for the first unit, and Dwayne Bett's Question of Freedom, and then Asada Shakur's autobiography. So within the first unit, I kind of talked about this already, but we have a lot of concepts we cover. And they also do write their personal statement, college essay in this unit to talk about their own kind of semblance of voice and narrative. It works really nicely with a senior fall course. But this one we talk about, from the guillotine to a more psychological lens of punishment. And we go through Michel Foucault's Panopticon and other concepts. This one I think is the most interesting to students, and it is the most chilling in a lot of ways. So we talk about capital punishment, the death penalty. This is 2025 data. We talk about Florida. Florida is the state that uses solitary confinement the most, which I think is horrifying and interesting as we are here, and it's surrounding us all the time. Florida is also a death penalty state, so these are very real things that we are conversing about and grappling with. Conditions of food as well as healthcare. Solitary confinement is one of the most unsimulatable experiences, and I show this video called "Fly in the Ointment." It's linked here. Also, all these links are at the end of the presentation as well. I can send out anything that you want, but it's unsimulatable, and I think this video does the best job in trying to simulate that experience from someone's own, testament. And then last but not least, we look at who is even incarcerated. So we talk a lot about racial disparity. We talk about women, non-binary people, men, LGBTQIA population, and how they're not proportionally represented in school to prison pipeline. A lot of conversations there. So at the end of the 4-5 months, depending on hurricanes in Florida, but at the end of this, they will have chosen a topic, and I have a huge list of topics. It's actually linked. My paper assignment sheet and everything's linked here. But they choose a topic that they have been researching and inspecting the entire year. Say it's collateral consequences, or like jobs and collateral consequences. And then they are tasked with thinking about what solutions exist already potentially. Why do they not work? Do they work? How could you create an intervention and tweak something in existence already? Not reinventing the wheel, because it's a 4-month paper and there are people that dedicate their lives to trying to look at and inspect these issues, but wanting them to educate our community is another part of this assignment. So after they put together this paper, we do a gallery walk, which is they create either an actionable or a creative component to their solution. And here are a few student submissions. You can see here's the artist, my students, and then what they're commenting on. So these would be creative submissions about collateral consequences, mental health ramifications, and then recidivism rates. Here's some more samples. Nico is talking about collateral consequences with jobs, and then Selena Lynn, she went into architecture. This is the original model of prison, and then this is her designed alternative model based on different practices in architecture. More student submissions, and this would be an actionable one, a letter to Congress or someone. I've only gotten one response, the Florida Department of Health Corrections. I am corresponding with them now, but and then this young woman, she performed a spoken word poem that she wrote about behavioral health wards. So last but not least, if you could, final time, return to the Google Doc, and this will kind of set us up for a Q&A, but what will you likely take away from the presentation? I know it's pretty brief, but I'm happy to sit and chat with us at the end here. How might you implement any of the strategies that we've discussed in a classroom if you're a classroom teacher, a workplace, or your life, if applicable? And we'll share out, and then hopefully we can get some conversation going on the big screen. So take a few more minutes to wrap up. We'll take about 30 more seconds, and then we do have some time for Q&A. So if you want to wrap up, and then we'll start the Q&A portion. Thank you all.
Hi, Natalie. Thank you. So the chat has been quite active.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, somebody came in late and apologized. But apart from that, Lucy Gray was wondering how parents took to this approach,
It's a
how
great
they
question.
responded to this project. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lucy. Parents, I've had surprisingly no pushback. I think parents trust the school. Number one, we have a lot of autonomy as teachers, which is just such a blessing. And I think too, parents, since I do teach this specifically only to seniors, the students are 17, 18 years old. So I think we are trying to foster a little bit more of autonomy within their own responses. Like they're going to get heavy content more or less in a college setting. So this is kind of a really measured and sensitive way to introduce them to some of the world's, darker parts, but in a way that is still in a supportive environment. So yeah, parents actually show up to the gallery walk frequently. I invite them all, and they come, they see their child's presentation, and several of them have has said that they see a difference in their child in terms of their ability to, I don't know, have some patience, a little bit more patience toward stories. And I know a student used the research that she had done over education and literacy rates in prison. She used a lot of it in her college application materials to talk about how she wanted to kind of keep looking into these ideas. And so I've been, again, very, very blessed. I could not do this class in a public school environment in Florida. So I'm, again, that's like number one, just making sure that we practice that gratitude to the environment and the space that we are in.
Wonderful. And so Lydia Welker asks, how have you seen students' worldviews change over the semester? Thinking back to that original class, changing your perspective.
Yeah. I think that's a great question, Lydia. So, in over 3 years, I always get, a new batch of students, and they all have their own intricacies and nuances. The first year, I think I was not confident in my abilities, and that the students I think could see. And so because I didn't have as much knowledge, information that I could give to them, and I had to acquire that more so over time. I think that they doubted their own assessments a little bit in the beginning as well. So now that I have had more time to learn more and be a better educator, with directing them to resources and offering more, pieces of stories, they are able to see me more as kind of how, like in a small way, how I've seen my professor, Katie, where, she's like a wealth of knowledge rather than she's trying to force an agenda. And that's what I would like for them. So, in terms of their worldview, I think because of the confidence pieces within myself as an educator, and then being able to share more with students, they are able to have more curiosity and inquisitiveness. And I did notice that I have students in the fall, and then I have a lot of them in the spring, and I teach dystopian literature in the spring. I asked them their first assignment in dystopian literature to build their own utopia, like just, craft out. And some of them actually do talk about, who have taken prison narratives, talk about how there would not be a prison system. They're like talking about prison abolition without having some of the language of that. And so I can see a marked difference between the students who took prison narratives. They even think about, like, what does justice look like in their utopia, versus the students who didn't take prison narratives. It's not mentioned in their utopia. So I think that's pretty cool to witness.
Yeah, it must be amazing. I love the structure that you presented to us, and how complete that is. And it develops a true compassion for certain parts of society we don't really think about, and it's so effective. There's another question down here. So it says, have you tried or considered trying taking the students to an actual prison? Might
Yeah.
that be exploitative? I'm just thinking out loud, she says. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's a great question. One of my goals is to do so, is to figure out the quote unquote field trip paperwork. And also, I think that's where I would get the most parent pushback, but because I haven't tried, I don't really know. So it would be a conversation with the head of my school, with the head of the upper school. And I do think there's a way to thoughtfully enter these spaces. I mean, I've worked as a volunteer at a Hazleton Women's Book Club, and worked with women on creative writing workshops. I've seen it done successfully. I mean, the Inside Out course is a great example of this. I think too it has to be the right group of kids to pilot that program. That's the other thing is I've kind of been waiting for the maturity level maybe to get there. I inspect it every year. Like, are we able to bring in guest speakers? Are we able to maybe even have a more extensive trip out to a, a, a prison or jail? But yes, it is definitely on my radar. So thank you for bringing that up.
Maybe even taking the exhibition or whatever you can take to the actual prison so the inmates see what's happening out there as well.
Hmm.
I wondered. Yeah. And so, maybe just as a final wrap up, what recommendations would you give to an educator who would like to follow this kind of program and implement it in their classroom?
Yeah, I would say probably seeing what is possible first, because the environment is a key ingredient to making sure that this is even possible. But I do think there are still small ways, depending on what environment that educator is in. It's just about including voices of those who have been or are currently incarcerated. Maybe not an entire course devoted to it, but just not having the forgotten system be forgotten is a huge part of it. And I think too, again, trying to come at the entirety of the angle with curiosity rather than with frustration or emotion or judgment. And that was a huge learning curve. Every year I have to remind myself it is by design a difficult course to teach emotionally. That's unique for me. Not like AP literature is rigorous. It's hard in terms of the reading loads and a lot of other components. This is the course that is I always have to regulate a bit more. So I think that if someone does decide to take on the very real emotional content that is offered in these courses, it's okay to try something and not be successful with it, and to have a hype person too. Lydia is my hype person, and I always say I may not be able to teach this forever, but every year I'm able to teach it, I will. And so that's important to me, that she always reminds me there's some messaging getting out somewhere. It may not be what you consider to be perfect, but it's getting to someone somewhere.
And there's one last one, if we can be very brief, because we're coming to
Yeah.
the time,
Yeah.
right, end of our time. But do you plan to change the course at all this coming fall? From Lydia Welker.
Great question. I do want to I have two political prisoners stories. Leonard Peltier, who actually just was released from Coleman, Florida, and is at home on a house restrictive incarceration sentence now. And then I have Asada. I think I would choose to remove Asada and choose something a little bit more contemporary. But I want to inspect, of course, the female voice, and I would like to inspect someone of queer status a little bit more. I do think those are missing from the course a little bit. So I've been thinking about that for about a year or so now.
Thank you. And so Elvir Manzu, and I hope I pronounced that more or less okay, just put in the chat somebody, Dr. Gibson, was wrongfully incarcerated for 16 years, and he can be invited to classes via Zoom to talk to students. So there you go. There's a new contact for you.
Thank you so much.
It
Yeah,
looks really interesting. So, well, we are at the top of the end of our time here. Thank you so much, Natalie. That was so insightful. So much information came out of this. I'm sure that it's going to be a big support to many educators. These do go up on our the Charter YouTube channel.
okay.
So we have such a global that it sometimes people see them see the recordings rather than coming to the events because
Mhm.
it's just out of their time zone. So don't worry about that. We do get many views, and I know it's going to be a big support to many people. So thank you for this, and I do hope this isn't the end of a collaboration and partnership. And
Yeah,
I'll
thank you
be
so
sending
much.
out your contact details to
Okay,
everybody who
wonderful. That was
registered.
my question. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate it,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Appreciate your time.
Bye.
Okay, take care. Bye.